All right, hello and welcome. I wanted to make this video to welcome you all to Sci 250, Introduction to Statistics for the Social Sciences. Um, Basically, wanted to introduce myself and have a first video before we dive into the semester content, just to really give you an overview of what this course is all about and what our semester will look like together. So for starters, my name is Kevin Walters. You're welcome to call me Dr. Walters or just Kevin is fine. I respond to either, and honestly, I don't really have a preference there. So whatever you're most comfortable with. And I'll talk a little bit more about my background and whatnot later in this video. But first, I wanted to talk to you all about this course, right? So this is Intro Stats for the Social Sciences. So presumably y'all are social science majors. It seems like we have a lot of psychology students who take this, but might be some of y'all from other social science disciplines as well. And so in this class, we are learning all about basic statistics, right? Some of you might have some exposure to stats in previous classes, but I assume, and it seems like the case in the classes that I've taught here, I assume that most of y'all haven't really had a class specific to the social sciences. And I think that's a really helpful aspect of this course is, when I look back on when I took my first intro stats course in undergrad, it was all about the formulas, the equations, distributions, but there wasn't a lot of context for how we could use those statistics. And that really kind of confused me and it didn't click. And so hopefully by putting it in the context of social sciences, what y'all are interested in, hopefully that will help to make it a little bit more approachable and understandable. Because I think statistics is one of those subjects that can be pretty scary to learn. It feels like math, and to me it feels even more confusing than math sometimes. Because it can be a little bit counterintuitive or just not as intuitive as some other disciplines of math and whatnot. But my goal in this course is to teach you all that it doesn't have to be scary. Right, it can still be frustrating, and there can still be a learning curve there. But this is something that y'all are capable of doing and learning and going out and doing on your own. And to me, I like to think of it as kind of like the tools that we use to generate knowledge and interpret things in our respective fields. Right, so my background is in psychology, for example, and statistics to me is the tools that we use to study and understand humans and human behavior. And so that's a little bit about the course. If you're interested in the subjects and whatnot, that's elsewhere in the course material. So I won't go through like week to week what we'll be doing, at least not in this video. But in terms of the format, why I'm recording this video in the first place, obviously this is an online course and it is asynchronous. And so I like to think of learning as a process that only you can do yourself. And so my goal as your instructor in this course is to really pave the way for you and chart the course for you to do your own learning. But at the end of the day, it's still something that I can't do for you, right? You have to put in the work, you have to put in the time and the effort and the energy to learn. And statistics, again, even if you feel like this is something that you're naturally inclined towards, this is still a lot of content that you might not have been exposed to before. So this is a class to really, I think, manage time wisely with and to budget time accordingly. If this is a class where you're putting things off to the last minute and trying to do things the night things are due, you're not going to be successful in this course, right? So that's something to know right off the bat, is that this content can take a while to absorb, and the course is structured as such that there's just a lot of content that you'll have to get through. And so in terms of the general flow throughout the semester, basically we'll be going week to week, and basically 1 week corresponds to one module in Canvas. Module is just like chunk, category, whatever you want to call it. But basically one module per week, and within each module we're focused on one specific subject. So later in the semester we will be talking about specific statistical tests, like you might have heard of t-tests, for example, or ANOVAs, correlations, right? These types of things. And earlier in the semester, we'll be talking about more basic statistical, foundational knowledge with which we can build on when we talk about those specific tests, right? So basically one week per module, or one module per week. And within each module, I have it structured to where everything's organized numerically. So you'll start on the first page, then proceed through in the order that they're listed in Canvas. And that's the way I've structured it to make it as, I guess, smooth of a process as it can possibly be for you. And so within the modules, I have a few different pieces of content that I'll provide you. Generally speaking, in terms of the like lecture piece or whatever you want to call that, I'll record a few videos. One is a conceptual overview, which is kind of broadly speaking what this tests are about, some examples of when we could use it, right? Kind of like the more like high level, like introductory content of like, this is what this is when we can use it, what we can use it for, before we dive into the nitty gritty of how to actually go out and do those analyses. And so that's the first video I'll typically have each week, is a broad conceptual overview. And then after that, I'll also have some more, I guess, hands-on or practical skill-based videos that move past the conceptual piece to focus on actually doing those analyses in a couple different formats. Ideally, I'll have one video where it's how do we do this by hand, right? So what's all the math and the equations and the processes and steps that go into doing this analysis. And then there will also hopefully be another video that's basically about how do we do this using stats programs, right? In this course, we're not going to dive really deep into some of the, I guess, higher end stats programs. Like, I don't know if y'all have heard of these. One that we use a lot in psychology is called SPSS, which I believe stands for Statistical Program for the Social Sciences, if I'm not making that up. That's something that I've used a lot in my research that I was taught on in grad school. So that's something that a lot of people use, but we're not going to dive too deep into that this semester. We'll focus more on things that are more approachable and that you might have some familiarity with to begin with. So we might use Microsoft Excel or something similar to it. There's some open source software out there. Maybe some other content or programs that are open source, like there's something called R and RStudio. But we'll see. This is the first time I'm teaching this course online, so I don't want to get too ambitious with that. But so to kind of summarize my point here, basically, rather than just one long lecture video, I'm not just going to blast you with that, right? I'm going to try to break it up into more manageable components, one of which is high level, here's what this is about, and then one or two more that are more hands-on, practical, skill-based things of how do we actually go and do this analysis. Then I'll also provide other content to help you learn, so I'll have some other online videos from YouTube and things like that I've curated that will help to demonstrate those topics and just give you a perspective other than my own, because I can't assume that just hearing from me is enough to really know these things. It's always helpful to have some different perspectives and examples. So some additional content like that, some additional websites and other learning tools online that might be helpful. And then also some readings, so some example articles that have used these analyses to help give you just another example of how these things can be used. So that's generally what the flow will look like week to week in terms of the content I'm providing you to learn. And then we'll also have a couple different sets of exercises. One is more practice-based, so you will have the opportunity to make mistakes, right, without fear of consequence. In more practical terms, you'll be able to submit those assignments as many times as you need to until you get things right. And so there will be that piece where you can really focus on learning and not be afraid of making mistakes, because they'll be forgiven. And then there will be a quiz, which is more high stakes, which you'll have 2 attempts for. Right. So basically, you can learn on your own, do these problems, get help as you need it, and then there will be a quiz to demonstrate that you've learned that content and those analyses. Yeah, so that's a little bit. I don't want to get too carried away with this video and make it too long. So it's a little bit about what the course will look like. Something else I want to note too is that I'm not a perfectionist in these videos. That's just my style. I'd rather kind of do one and done than spend all my time like editing the perfect video, because I don't think that's useful for either of us. I think it's important to present to you my real understanding of statistics and a real process of learning it, not some edited perfectionist version of what it's like to learn statistics, because it is hard and you do make mistakes. And for me, in terms of my background with stats, I've been teaching statistics, oh gosh, for probably 6 or 7 years. I used to teach for an online master's program, and I've taught it at the undergraduate level as well. Um, and I've used statistics for longer than that. My first stats class would have been, I don't know, 12 years ago now or something like that. And so even with all my experiences, it's still something that I have to brush up on each time I'm doing it, right? It's to me, it's not necessarily like, or I guess one way I can think of it is, it's kind of like writing. Like if you take a break from writing and you have a paper assigned to you, that first like day of writing can feel like a real just drag. It feels like you're kind of getting warmed back up to it. It doesn't feel familiar, but then it kind of comes back to you relatively quickly the more you've had those experiences. Statistics to me is like that, right? And that when I first started, it always felt clunky, but with time and experience, it feels a lot less clunky now. But if I take a break from it, it still takes me a little while to kind of get back in that flow. Um, yeah, so just know that, right? That yeah, again, if this is something that feels intimidating, it does get easier. Um, but everyone, I think, has their own relationship with statistics. Um, and I've met very few people in my life who could just rattle off statistical knowledge from memory in perpetuity. And so, speaking of my past experience with statistics, I wanted to give you, to wrap this video up, I wanted to give you just a little bit of info on who I am, since you'll be watching or hearing from me a lot this semester. So in terms of my background, so I guess I'll start in the present. So I'm a assistant professor of psychology at UAF in the psychology department. I guess that was kind of redundant. Um, so my background and expertise is in something called industrial organizational psychology. It's a field that I'd say is still pretty young, like in its infancy or adolescence, and that yeah, it's just one that I think a lot of people haven't really heard of. So broadly speaking, what that field is, it's a lot of syllables, so we shorten it to IO psychology. What IO psychology is all about is applying psychology to work in the workplace. So it could be a variety of issues workplaces might face, like how do we improve team communication? How do we select and train good leaders? How do we develop good training programs to begin with? How do we have good performance management systems? How do we understand and assess and improve our organizational culture? How do we create a more inclusive work environment? Right, the list goes on and on. And so there's lots of different ways we can apply psychology in work settings. And even within that, I'd say, primary level of expertise is in occupational health psychology, which is basically one way of saying that I'm focused on health or workplace health and safety. Right. So, and that can look lots of different ways. But point being here that whenever we're doing that, like say I'm working with some organization and they want to get a pulse on their current organizational culture, right? How people feel about something. Maybe they're going through some change. Maybe they're doing a merger and acquisition, right? Could be lots of different things. But whenever we're going to do that, basically what we're trying to do is to get information from lots of different people, right? And so anytime we're doing a project like this, especially with large organizations, statistics is the primary tool that we use. Or I guess I should say research methods, so like survey design, for example, and data collection. And then once we've done that, then we use our statistics to interpret that, right, and draw conclusions about what's happening in that organization. So that's a bit about what I do in terms of how I got here. So I'm originally from Kansas, born and raised in Wichita. I don't know if any of y'all have been to Kansas, but my roots go back into smaller like farming communities and towns around Wichita. And I am a first generation college student as well. Neither of my parents went to college. My dad's an electrician. He's about to retire this year, actually, after a long career as an electrician. And my mom didn't really have a career per se. I'm one of 5 kids, so there was a big family. And when we were younger, she mostly stayed at home and took care of the kids. And then as we got older, she worked odd jobs here and there, like in her school kitchen. She nannied my cousin's kids, stuff like that. Yeah, and so when I went to college, or I guess growing up, I was always taught that college was something that I was supposed to do, but I didn't really, I think, yeah, fully grasp what it was all about. And so I kind of stumbled my way through it. I started out in mechanical engineering at Kansas State University. After I did that for a year, I realized I didn't love it, and so I wanted to try something different and switch to psychology kind of on a whim. Uh, yeah, like I'd had people tell me I'd be a good counselor, and my sister was in psychology. She was working on her bachelor's at the time, and so I was like, yeah, I'll give it a shot. And long story short, within psychology, I kind of continued to wander and eventually settled on IO psychology and decided that's what I wanted to go to grad school for. And so I applied to PhD programs because I figured that would open more doors for me than a master's. And I also kind of wanted to delay having to make the big decisions about what I do with my life. But so I applied to some programs and was lucky enough to get into Colorado State University. So I spent 6 years there working on my master's and my PhD. And then when I was finishing up at CSU, there was an opening at Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado, in their psychology department. And I was real excited about the prospect of staying in Colorado. And so I applied for that job, and that's where I was for the past 3 years prior to coming to UAF. And really, in the midst of COVID, I didn't feel like I had like my feet under me in Durango, and the cost of living was going up. And for a lot of different reasons, my partner and I decided we wanted to look elsewhere. So I saw the opening at UAF and had always been interested in coming up to Alaska. And so here we are. So I'm in my first year now, but all told, I've been a faculty member for this my fourth year. And prior to that, I was a grad student. I was one of those people who just kind of went all the way through. Um, yeah, so that's a little bit about me. This video is already starting to get long, so I'll kind of cut it off there. Um, but I guess what I'll wrap it up with is to say that um, once again, I feel like I might be making it worse by repeating this, but it does seem pretty common when I teach stats that this is a course that intimidates people, and it feels like one that they just want to survive sometimes. And really, I would encourage you to try to flip that narrative, and instead of focusing on how to survive, focus on how to thrive. Um, right, and know that I've been a learner of statistics. I continue to be a learner of statistics. Throughout my career, there have been projects that come up where I have to learn some new statistical method that I hadn't learned previously. And the more you do this, right, it's like anything else. The more you practice it, the easier it gets, and the more familiar it becomes. Right, and so if you put in the hours, put in the work this semester, my hope and goal is that you will be able to thrive in statistics and in this environment. Um, and so I guess on that note, final point is if you need help, do ask for it. My email contact info is available on Canvas. If you're located in Fairbanks, I'm in my office a lot. But even if you're not here, I have lots of availability for virtual meetings over Zoom. Yeah, so feel free to reach out. Hopefully that addressed some of the basic questions you might have at this point, and we'll see you around.